Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, politics in Utah didn't take a summer vacation. Which issues dominated the headlines? What were the major takeaways from the primaries? And how are Utahns reacting to the raucous confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Judge Kavanaugh? Utah's midterm elections are in full swing, with ads already hitting the airwaves. How are candidates trying to appeal to voters? What messages are resonating? Which ballot initiatives are heating up? And could D.C. politics impact the results? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Jennifer Napier-Pearce, editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, Lisa Riley-Roche, political reporter with the Deseret News, and Glen Mills, political reporter with ABC4 Utah. So glad to have you all here. I've been missing you over the summer. So much has happened in politics. So much. Jennifer, we're going to start with you because we're talking about this anonymous op-ed piece put out by the New York Times. And how often do we really get to ask the editor of a paper, what was going on there? What happened in the decision-making process right there for sort of a very rare move of an anonymous op-ed?
Well, I can't say that I was in the New York Times boardroom, but I would say this is not a decision that they took lightly. I'm sure that they consulted as a board for multiple days. I don't think it was a rash decision because, number one, you're doing something that is very, as you noted, very, very rare. I mean, we do not publish anonymous op-eds like this just willy-nilly.
Is that kind of the Tribune's position too?
Absolutely. I mean, again, we encourage our sources to come forth and stand by what they say, and to have these accusations out there on the most high-profile politician in the land is very, very risky for the Times. They know the identity of who this person is, who wrote this, and so I guess that outweighed any risk of being, you know, in the deliberations. I'm sure it was over and over and over. What will the consequences be for the Times and for the country? I mean, it's not just an editorial board decision made in a vacuum. This has implications globally.
So your view of this, having had made these kinds of decisions, is all these things outweighed the risks.
Apparently it did. Okay,
because I guess the time will tell on that, right? Because you know, we have some interesting people coming out right now trying to find out who it was. I'm guessing you didn't write the letter.
Nope, not me.
Right. Okay. Lisa, I thought
didn't write it either.
So you didn't write it?
My money was on you.
Okay, well, apparently we're knocking people out, but this is an interesting point now because there's been a whole line of people jumping to say it wasn't me, right? You had an interesting article in the paper just today, in your paper, because some people even thought it might be John Huntsman.
Exactly. I mean, no one in the Trump administration is apparently immune from accusations here. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that so many members of the administration, I mean, it looked like a police lineup of people who said, I did not do this.
And they did it in writing.
Exactly, and very firmly.
And my understanding, some of it with actual letters, right?
Yes.
It's not just an email, hey, boss, it wasn't me, it was...
Right. Exactly, and Ambassador Huntsman took the step of issuing a denial from his spokesperson at the embassy in Moscow fairly late in the evening their time to say that he did not only that he didn't write it because he would sign something like that, but he came up, and it was interesting because if you read the op-ed carefully, you saw little tidbits that pointed to various members of the administration. And in Huntsman's case, it was the fact that John McCain was lauded in this. And also there was references to the administration's policy on Russia. So the Daily Mail used a source from the State Department, an unnamed lawyer, who suggested, yes, it may may well be a Jon Huntsman for those very reasons.
His children were very quick to jump on social media and say, no way, was not my dad either. That was kind of interesting to watch how that played out.
Hey, Glenn, why do you think it was so important for these people to be on the record, and more than just, behind the scenes, officially, publicly on the record saying, wasn't me? Why is that important?
Well, because they feared possibly what could happen if it was them. Obviously, this person who went and wrote this op-ed wanted nothing to do with saying who they were because they feared the consequences or what would happen next. So I think it was very important for all of them to jump on board fast and say, look, it wasn't me.
But it may also be that they were trying to protect whoever wrote that, whether it was one person or maybe several people, because they agree with the policy of trying to rein in the impulses of this president that are against what was described in this op-ed as a very conservative agenda that Republicans, like those in the administration, would support, want to see carried out, and not want to see harmed by the president. And so it may be that they were also trying to protect.
I just wonder if that was their agenda to protect. Why would they all just not say anything to leave the mystery going that way, as opposed to everyone saying it wasn't me? And then trying to narrow it down that way.
If they all deny, including the person or persons that did it, then everyone's protected.
Well, my hypothesis is, number one, Trump is mercurial and he could lash out at anyone at any time. But the fact remains, he has a very loyal following. And so this person, even though they are risking, or committee, whoever wrote this, is risking some personal employment or whatever influence. On the other hand, I mean, they don't want to get kicked out because they want to see this agenda carried through. And they think the only way that's going to happen is if Trump stays in place.
Here's one thing I'm interested to watch, though. How far is President Trump going to push this? He is right now really hitting big on this is a national security problem, and calling for the New York Times out of duty to reveal who this person is. I'm curious to see how far that's going to go, and how far you talked about how the conversation that went into making this decision. Are they really, when push comes to shove, are they going to protect that person through the very end? I think that's really interesting to watch.
So Jennifer,
how that'll
take this thread, because that's what President Trump is saying today. Say it's one thing to have people not happy with my agenda, but someone has admitted to walking into his office and taking a piece of paper off the desk that they disagreed with or they didn't want to go forward. Is this a national security issue with some senior level staffers in the White House?
Well, I think it is, because that's why they are sort of cloaked in secrecy, and I also think that's why Trump is so infuriated by this. You hear all sorts of different arguments, and at this point, I think that it's boiling down to conspiracy theories. It's less about national security and more about democracy. And there is a constitutional mechanism to get rid of a president that is not performing or is deemed to be unfit for office. Whoever wrote this said that they thought that solution would cause a constitutional crisis, so they don't want to go down that road.
But they did mention it.
It. I don't know. There is such a mystery surrounding this whole thing, and I don't think that it's going to go away with Trump. He fixates on things like this.
Until he fixates on something else.
Until he fixates, right?
I have
that's
a feeling
true,
though he's
that's
going to
true.
stay on this one, and I'm curious to see how far he's going to push.
Well, let's see how. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, let's remember it's not just the op-ed. We also have Bob Woodward's new book, and so far we've only seen excerpts from this book. It's not out until next Tuesday. As we all know from Hinckley Institute bringing Bob Woodward in, this is someone who's very respected. This is someone who works very hard to source his books, his material. And he told us when he was here in Salt Lake City that he goes up to someone's door in the middle of the night or very late at night, hopefully after they've had a few pops, as he said, a few drinks, and knocks on their door and wants to sit down and talk to them. And he said this is how he wrote this book. He has hundreds of hours of taped interviews with all kinds of sources. So it's not just one person or a group of people emerging with an op-ed in the New York Times. it's supported by this book that we're going to see more of in the coming days.
And Woodward is a legendary, iconic journalist.
Yes.
We've already seen President Trump try to go down the road of discrediting him. That's going to be a tough one to do. I mean, obviously with his base, he'll probably be successful with that, but with average Americans and across the country, he is seen as an iconic person in this industry, and one that is very trustworthy.
A lot harder than Omarosa.
Right.
To discredit, you know?
That's true.
Or the Fire and Fury book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Earlier
Yes.
on in the administration.
Glenn, one final point on this, because I know we all went to see Bob Woodward, and it was very interesting to hear his speech. The title of this book is Fear, Trump in the White House. Anything you remember from that conversation you had that he may have been foreshadowing this book coming out to us?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take that speech, I believe all of us were there listening to it, it is exactly foreshadowing this book, talking about how Trump rules through fear, and that ties into this conversation we're having right now about why someone is going through anonymously because of a fear of the repercussions and what might happen. So yes, I think we kind of got a little precursor of the book when we saw his speech here.
Okay, so let's see how this impacts one other very interesting thing happening in the press right now that Utahns do care about, the selection of the new United States Supreme Court Justice. So Jennifer, I mean, are there any implications on this process kind of hidden in this kind of discord that's happening with not just the letter but also the book?
You think the timing might have something to do
wondering.
with it?
Yeah,
I
one
don't
must
know.
wonder.
Again, this does seem to be an unusual confluence of things happening. You do have the Woodward excerpts that were released. A couple days later, the op-ed. And then, you know, in the midst of all of this, in the background is Kavanaugh. And it's been pretty interesting to watch the hearings, the testimony, the softball questions versus the outright outrage from the Democratic senators. I don't know. Lisa and I were talking about this. Summer is supposed to be a slow news time, and that has just not been the case, as you mentioned in your intro. I mean, there's no summer vacation this year.
No, that's true.
When was the last time you could turn on C-SPAN and you felt like you were watching a Jerry Springer episode on CW instead? Well, this is must-see television. On Monday, when these hearings started, by nature, I'm interested in politics. I'm always watching these type of hearings. When I went into our newsroom, those that aren't necessarily ever watching these type of hearings were glued to the television on the edge of their seat watching this. It's just fascinating to see how, the impact that this is having, and people are paying more attention to it now as a result of what we're seeing going on, because it's like, I've got to watch this to see what's going to happen next. It's like the circus impact.
Yes, and the Supreme Court justice was a central campaign issue. I mean, for a lot of voters, they were willing to overlook Trump's despicable behavior and say, you know what, though, he stands in line with the values that I want to see on the high court. And the high court could have implications for my life, my family's life, my grandkids' life, for many generations. And so I think people were willing to turn a blind eye. And that's why there's so much drama going on. It is theater. It is political theater, right?
And it certainly raises the stakes, right? Because if Trump can't deliver on the one thing that everyone was dead set on getting out of a Republican president, conservative Supreme Court justices, that's going to be really tough for the Congress not to take a good look at impeachment.
Especially here in Utah, people here in our state we know had trouble coming around to President Trump. A lot of people voted for the third-party candidate in Evan McMullin, and the ones that I think did come around and say, I'm okay with voting for President Trump is because they liked the nominees that he put forward on the Supreme Court.
Including
and I'm going,
two Utahns.
Yes, and I'm going to suggest that a lot of Utahns came around and voted for him for that reason and that reason only.
Lisa, do you think this holds true then? Because this certainly seems to be proven out time and time again with the polls for Utah voters. Is Kavanaugh a pick that Utahns are going to say, all right, that tilts the scale for me still again? I'm okay because I get this person.
I think, well, you and I talked about this earlier this week. As long as the president can continue to deliver on his promises that are important to Utahns, and we've seen that in the tax cuts and in some of the deregulation, certainly in this state, in the shrinking of the national monuments, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. And the Supreme Court may be the most important to a lot of Utahns who have strong feelings about conservative issues and believe if they can get that swing vote in the hands of a conservative on the high court, they can see the kinds of changes they want on things like Roe versus Wade, or maybe even same-sex marriage, or, you know, name the conservative issue. Maybe not an overturning of those decisions, but kind of chipping away at them in a way that would satisfy the conservatives here in this state.
So you're talking about great substance here, but I have to ask you one final question on this. This also looks like it's a grand stage for the people who want to run for president next. Have you noticed that? Anyone standing out in your minds?
Well, of course, Cory Booker.
Wow.
Right?
Did he really say
Spartacus.
A Spartacus moment?
Spartacus moment, yes.
So is that what a lot of this is, would you say?
I think that's what people are trying to do with this. It has like 2 stages, right? You've got the midterm elections, and you want to energize your base to make sure they get out there in the midterms and understand we're not kidding when we say elections have consequences. If you feel strongly as a progressive Democrat about decisions the Supreme Court has made in the past, like Roe versus Wade, this is what can happen. You need to be angry, you need to be upset, you need to vote.
Wow.
And the same thing with Republicans. If you like the direction the court is heading under this president, make sure the Democrats don't take over in November and possibly impeach this president. So it's part of it is just getting everyone excited for the midterms, right? And get that turnout. And I think we've already seen some of that effect in some of the primary elections recently, right? In terms of the voters that have turned out on both sides of the aisle.
So we need to talk about a couple of those. Do you mind? Because you're right. These issues these become platforms for campaigns, and we're in full swing in Utah in some very interesting races. Yes. I want to just kind of tee up a couple of these things, because while we were off the air for the summer, we had some primaries, which were interesting. I want to talk about this.
It seems like so long ago,
I know,
doesn't it?
I can't even remember.
I know. I love these days. Mitt Romney beat Michael Kennedy 72% to 29%, so Mitt Romney will be on the ballot. John Curtis beat Chris Herrod 73.5% to 26.5%, which is interesting, because I just need one little comment on this, because those margins are pretty big, particularly considering the margins they took where they ran in the convention process was very small. Right. Jennifer, have we seen the last of the power of the conventions when we see, yet again, candidates winning by such large margins?
Well, it's just another piece of evidence that I think the people who want the 2-track system to stay in place, I mean, I think that they can point to this as Exhibit A. I mean, that really illustrates in a way that words just cannot. You cannot argue with the numbers and the disparity in the general voter base and in the convention system. So one thing on that particular race, I do think it was interesting that Herrod really aligned himself with Trump agenda, and yet that did not resonate with the general public in that primary election. So I should say, not the general public, the Republicans who voted in that primary. So I don't know what that means for November, because
Mike Kennedy did the same thing in the Senate race.
He absolutely did.
Really aligned closely with the Trump agenda, but it was Mitt Romney that President Trump came out and endorsed.
Right.
One thing I'll add to that conversation is those who support the caucus convention system say that's the purpose of the caucus, to get 2 good candidates to the primary election. But there's one thing they're not able to answer for specifically, and that's in the 3rd district. If it were not for SB 54, John Curtis would not be representing the 3rd district right now, because he never made it out of caucus in the first special election caucus. It would have been Senator Henderson and Chris Herrod. So he wouldn't even be representing that district right now, and he won big time in the latest primary election.
He did indeed. We do have one race, at least right now, that seems pretty close in our 4th congressional district, Ben McAdams and Mia Love. Usually we wait until after Labor Day to see all the great commercials.
They couldn't wait.
They couldn't.
Why couldn't they wait, you suppose?
Because it's close.
It's a close race.
They both have money, and it's a close race, and they both wanted to get the jump on attracting voter interest. And it was interesting, both initial ads very positive for each of the candidates. You know, Ben McAdams introducing his family in kind of a fun, lighthearted way, and just slipping in a few of his policies. He's got a second ad now, again with kind of a fun tone to it.
When is his family again?
Him showering, his family's there.
Well, with his clothes on.
Well, exactly. And it's fully dressed in the shower. So that ad has confused a few people, but he does turn to the camera at one point, and no Pelosi, does not support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. So a little bit of substance there. Whereas Congresswoman Love has emphasized her role in getting the release of Josh Holt, and more importantly, her role with Josh's mother, Lori, standing by her throughout the ordeal. So we haven't seen negative advertising yet, but it's just a matter of time before that shoe drops.
Well, we certainly heard negative rhetoric, though. I mean, the barbs have been going back and forth.
It's all behind the scenes, though, and it's all very,
I suspect
very
as we get closer to the election, we will start to see some of those jabs come out. But to your point, I mean, you just sat here and named off exactly what's going on in these commercials. We've seen Ben McAdams' children more than we've seen our own of late. Who doesn't
you need
have?
to go home, Glenn.
Yeah, right. Who doesn't have his youngest son saying "ah, yeah" mixed in their head over and over again? And then the image of him taking a shower. These are memorable messages that both are sending that are sticking with people, and I think that's the point of the early campaign kickoff, is to send out a message that people will talk about and that people will remember. I also think you hit a huge point in that he's introducing his family. Utah's all about families, and he's making sure his being a family man is up front.
And it's not a coincidence that Representative Love mentions over and over, I identified with the Holts as a mother. I mean, she's also reinforcing that family value.
How effective do you think that whole commercial was on Josh Holt for Mia Love?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I think that it does say, that was a drama that played out over a couple of years, and Utahns really wanted to see this guy come home, and she's linking it with her involvement that made it happen. Yeah. So in terms of messaging, I thought it was pretty darn good.
One point on that ad, some people came out early and said, well, she might be taking more credit for what she really did, but the fact of the matter is,
hey, the family stands behind her.
The Holts are on that commercial saying, in their own words, we support Representative Mia Love. You could not pick a representative better than her, and those are strong words coming directly from the mouth of the Holts.
Sure. And to your point, Glenn, about Ben McAdams showcasing his family and how now we all have that family kind of ingrained in our minds. I talked to a number of pundits that suggested that was incredibly deliberate, not just a traditional introductory commercial where you're trying to show who you are to voters that may not know you very well as a person, your family, your values. They may just know you as a figure that they've seen from time to time in news stories. It's more than that. It's an opportunity for him to establish how important family is to him, as you said, in a very family-oriented state, given that his opponent throughout the campaign cycle so far has constantly raised his previous votes on against abortion limiting bills that were before the legislature when Mayor McAdams was a state senator. So it's kind of a subtle way of reminding people, no, you may have heard this about him, but this is who we want you to see him as.
So this whole thing kind of gives us sort of the subtext here. Is this going to get nasty, this race? I mean, you brought up a couple of things.
Jennifer pointed out that they've already been saying a lot of
so
things.
It's behind the scenes, but is this going to be the one fight where everyone's going to say, well, I'm not sure.
Well, the letters to the editor that we're getting are negative in tone. And part of it is, well, Ben McAdams interned for the Clintons, and he's maintained this long-standing relationship with them. Therefore, he is a Clintonite, and you should not vote for him. Mia Love is a grandstander. She's taking credit for things that she didn't actually do. Yes, if people out there, and maybe they're plants, I don't know, but I do sense that there are some sharp words ahead. And when the debate comes, the official Utah Debate Commission debate comes up, it's going to get ugly.
I think there's no question about that. Even
they're both fighting for their political lives, right? in some respects. I mean, everything is hinging on this success.
Yeah, I want to talk about one issue that I know, Glenn, you've been doing some work on too. It's kind of the impact of that race and how people show up to vote on marijuana. Because we got to talk about that proposition, right?
I don't know about you guys. I am fascinated by this upcoming ballot. And I am positive that these ballot initiatives are going to draw crowds that typically haven't voted in the past. I'm not sure exactly what impact, say, those that come out specifically for the medical marijuana initiative will have, but I'm almost positive we're going to see higher turnout, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how that higher turnout impacts some of the other races on the ballot.
What's going to drive more people to the ballot? Marijuana or Mitt Romney?
Marijuana.
Marijuana?
No one's worried about Mitt Romney.
No.
In reality, Jenny Wilson, the Democratic candidate, the Salt Lake County Councilwoman, is running a strong race. But it's a huge uphill fight for any Democrat in a statewide race, and a Democrat running against Mitt Romney, one of the most popular politicians in Utah.
So people going to stay home then? No one's worried about Mitt. What are they worried about?
I think you're right. I think they're going to be driven by all of the rhetoric we're hearing around, especially Proposition 2, the legalization of medical marijuana.
One thing I'll say about that, going back to the 4th Congressional District race, there's a reason that a lot of members of our congressional delegation have signed on to the opposition of Proposition 2, and Mia Love's name is not on there. It's absent. She's staying neutral there because the people that are going to be driven to the polls for Proposition 2 are going to be voting in favor of it, and she doesn't want to alienate those voters that will be in her district as well.
Is the support, we got about 10 seconds, the support of that, is it going up or down in Utah?
I think it's going slightly down, but it's going to pass.
Okay. It's going to have to be the last word on that. Can't wait to see.
That went by so fast.
Good. Thank you all so much for your insights. That's it for this episode of the Hinckley Report. For more discussion, follow us online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you and good night.